Welcome back, YouTube viewers. Thank you for being here. Thank you for supporting this channel, allowing me to do this every single day, travel around and chase walleyes. You guys read the title of this video. We don't have to go like all secretive, like, oh, what are we gonna talk about today? It is September like 5th or 6th or something like that right now, somewhere in there. And fall is right around the corner. In fact, we got water temps that are 68 degrees. The next couple days for our weather forecast, where we are, is like lows in the upper 30s, low 40s, highs in the low 60s or 60 degrees. Fall is coming. And I absolutely love fall fishing. Phenomenal time to get out and chase walleyes. But really wanted to do a video kind of talking about 3 things that I think make a big difference in the fall, that are fundamentally going to catch you more fish. These aren't super complicated things. These are just super good kind of programs to follow to catch more fish in the fall. But before I start talking too much, Mitchell, you know we got to set the hook a couple times, or at least once, and then we'll go into some of this stuff. So stay tuned. We're going to run the old side imaging program here, try to find some fish, try to catch some fish, and spill the beans on 3 things that I think make a big difference in the fall. There's a few here. You want to take a gander at them, Mitchell? There's our suspect. Oh. He's right there. And he's got friends here. And that looks good enough to me. Well, we're basically just going down a big sand flat right now, trying to find some fish to cast at. And now that we've found some, I know I can pretty much put the live down, chug back into them, catch fish. So stay tuned. We're about to catch them. Bring on them trophy whitetails. Fish on! Right there. Feels like a decent fish. When you're fishing shallow, which is kind of what this place is known for, they all fight hard. There's no real getting around that. They got nowhere to go but to fight. And I always say there's some places where walleyes fight really hard, and some places where catching a walleye is just catching a walleye. This is one of those places where even you guys are gonna be like, you know, when you guys see this fish, you're gonna be like, what, that's it? Just a nice fat 20-inch walleye. And we'll take those all day long. Come here, buddy. Come here, buddy. On the jig. Oh, that is one of my favorite reasons why you can come to Leech Lake. It's because you can literally put a jig on in May and not take it off for the entire year. And anytime you can fish all day with a jig in your hand is a good day in my book. Look how chubby they are. Oh, there he goes. Back in. And there are so many nice fish like that in this system. We're just sitting here in 10 feet of water, hoping to pluck a bunch of them off. All right. Tip number 1 for fall walleye fishing. Now, one of the reasons I love fall so much is because you can fish a jig all fall long. Really starting from now on a lot of bodies of water all the way until the lake freezes over. You can catch a walleye on a jig. Now, one thing I see happen is a lot of times bug hatches start to slow down, or there's not bug hatches anymore later into fall. So generally fish get in a little bit more of a minnow type of pattern. We're still in this, you know, late summer, transitioning to early fall time frame. So we're fishing crawlers today, but into fall, a lot of times it's minnow stuff. Now, when you're talking about jig fishing, when I started walleye fishing, was as simple as dropping a jig over the side of the boat and going like this. And we've learned that there's a lot of different little nuances to jig fishing. Now, one of those things is fall rate. Is how fast that minnow or whatever you're fishing on there is going up and down and to the bottom, right? A lot of times the colder it gets, the lighter I like to go. So I might even go all the way down to like an 1/8, or if I'm fishing really shallow, a 1/16 sometimes. This is a Kalen's Pendu jig. I might put a live minnow on there. Now, one thing you can do is if fish get real negative in shallow water, which is a lot of times where we're fishing in the fall, you can put a minnow on this really light jig head and almost just kind of hover it, almost just kind of slowly reel it, and just kind of let that minnow do a lot of the action. Now that's not going to have a very good effect on a big heavy jig head like this, because the jig head's just going to pull the minnow around. But on a very light, like quarter or eighth or 16th, a lot of times you can do that. So a lot of times if I want to fish really slow, if fish are really lethargic, I'll go really light. Or if the water temp's just very cold, a lot of times I like going very light. So I'll fish a lot of times a quarter or a eighth or even a 16th. Sometimes I'm fishing 3-4 feet of water, Pendu jig for that. And that jig I really like because it does a lot of this in the water column, right? Now, let's say I'm doing a snap jigging program, or I'm really cracking a bait hard in that 10 to 15 foot range. Then in that case, a lot of times, especially if there's bigger walleyes around, I like going to a bigger jig with a very sturdy hook. This is a Kalin's, I think this is just a regular tube jig head in a 1/2 ounce. This is a 3/8 ounce Kalin's swim bait head, and you can see the hook difference. This is a Kalin's show jig right here. This is a Kalin's swim bait head in the same weight. This is obviously much bigger. It's kind of meant to be that plastic butted up to it with that big, strong, wide hook gap. That's meant for really hitting a fish super hard on a bigger type of plastic. So a lot of times think of the hook you're using. Think of the weight you're using, right? Now, when it comes to pairing these with different things, I'm not going to take this jig, this 1/8 ounce tiny jig that's meant for fishing live bait or a small plastic, and put a really big plastic on it. That's just going to not pair well. The hook's not going to have any gap coming out of the plastic. So let's say I want to rig up a big jerk minnow style of plastic on a bait like this. And a lot of times in the fall, we're fishing a lot of bigger plastics like this if we're targeting bigger fish a lot of times. So a lot of times what I'll do, run that on there like that, run it through the gap like that, thread it up onto the jig, boom, boom, done, just like that. And a lot of times you kind of work the plastic back to get the back of that minnow kind of perfectly horizontal, something that looks just like that right there. Now, that's kind of one way you can rig a bait on one of these bigger jig heads. Now, one of the overlooked things, in my opinion, if you're going to fish plastics, is when you get into really shallow water and you're dealing with fish that are maybe a little bit more hit or miss, and really fishing for a lot of those 15 to 20 inch walleyes that a lot of us are after, right? Those classic eater-sized walleyes. One thing you can do, and it might take me a second to find one here, is fish a very small presentation a lot of times. And we might have to dig around. I just keep all these different bags of stuff with me. One thing I'll do is go to a very small finessey one and work it very soft. If I was gonna put a plastic on right now, this is what I would do, because it'd be the best at kind of mimicking a lot of the small perch that a lot of these fish are eating right around me right now. But then you go ahead and you put this on in this 1/8 ounce jig head and pop it around and work it real short and kind of non-aggressive in some shallow water. And it can be a phenomenal way to target a lot of these a little bit more finessey walleyes in shallow water. You can see that presentation right there. So a lot of times I'm fishing really shallow, I'll go smaller like this, or if I'm fishing for those 15 to 20 inch fish, I'm rigging up something like that when I'm jigging fall walleyes. So a lot of different things to jig fishing. It's not just as easy as grabbing the first jig you see out of the box, putting something on it, and working the bait, however it might be. Think about your fall rate. If the fish aren't on one thing, go to something else, go to something slower, go to something faster, go to something jumpier, go to something that kind of just sits on the bottom and you work that bait slower. The other big one is jig cadence. See, that matter a lot. And if we kind of go up to the front here, I'll put, so this is obviously a jig and a plastic right here. And we're gonna kind of go up here real quick. And a lot of times, 99% of the time, the way I'd work this bait, get it out there around fish, I'm gonna let it hit the bottom, and I'm gonna start doing something that looks like this. Just kind of snap jigging it, cracking the rod back to the boat, let it hit bottom, crack the rod again. One thing you might notice, some days these fish might like it a little bit more like this, just kind of on the bottom, where that bait's just kind of like this on the bottom. And you might kind of get that bite where the rod just starts to load up. I've had a lot of luck doing that. Other days where those fish need something like big and jumpy to get a response, it might be something more like this. And we'll probably see it at some point today, but as you are jig fishing, pay attention to things. When is the bite coming? Is the bait falling and you're getting that big crack? Or are all the bites coming on the bottom? Are you not getting bit when you're like, you know, I always say, are you not getting bit when you're paying attention and trying to do everything right? Or are you getting bit when you're, you know, looking around and you're just kind of like limping the rod like this and all of a sudden, oh, there's one right there. Because a lot of those things will tell you either go faster, slower, downsize, go up, go less aggressive, more aggressive, all those kind of things. I prefer to fish a jig out away from me as opposed to right next to the boat. Some deep water situations, obviously you can vertical jig, but think about the movement, right? If you are fishing straight vertical and just going like this, do you ever see a minnow in the water column just swim like this? Not very often. When you cast the bait and jig it back, even if you're in deeper water, even if we're in 35 feet here and you're only making casts that long, that bait now has three-dimensional movement. It's going up and down and it's going linearly. So it's moving multiple different directions at the same time. And I think that gets a lot more bites. So big jig fishing season in the fall, pay attention to a lot of little things and play around, because the fall is the time of year to catch fish on jigs. On Mitchell. I was on the plastic too. Long ways out there, long pitch. 3/8 ounce jig head and a swim bait. It's still about 70 degrees out, but you could tell fall is in the air. And this is one of those fall presentations that will literally catch walleye anywhere. There's a decent one, huh? Oh, yeah. He's angry too. Come here, buddy. Come here, buddy. He ain't gonna get off because this jig has a shark hook on it. So we can play him out, make it all nice for the video. Go ahead and grab you here, buddy. Nice fat one too. Come here, bud. Look at that. Oh man, I was just on 3/8 ounce jig head, swim bait. Pretty simple presentation. And one that will work anywhere you go in the fall. Fishing big shallow flats and just running around looking for fish to cast at. Snap jigging right in his face on that one. Nice walleye right there. It's about as pretty and perky as they get. There we go. And man, you can tell they're eating good out here because they are fat. They're not even super hungry right now. Casting at quite a few and getting a couple to bite. I just switched to this and I was almost surprised on the hook set that the fish bit. He picked it up right on the bottom, but jig and some offering on the end of it. That is what you fish in the fall. Literally everywhere you go, you could fish that. All right, their biggest fall thing. That pretty much is the entire fall. The way we start every single day in the fall is almost always looking at side imaging, which is what we're doing right now. We'll throw the old display up here. Now, we're gonna kind of go into a little bit of this. We just filmed a phenomenal video a few days ago for the Walleye Now app, which is like really the ultimate breakdown on a lot of times how you attack this entire thing. So if you want like a refresher, there's a lot of content on Walleye Now in fall about side imaging. So once you're on the app, basically go down. Obviously you're gonna wanna hit early fall because that's pretty much the time of year we're entering here. Go to whatever type of body of water you're on and you're gonna see videos. Can't see with my sunglasses on. They look like this. This one right here, early summer or late summer, early fall weed pattern. This is gonna go through like a super in-depth breakdown on exactly this, but in a lot more detail. So we're using side imaging right now. We're cruising down the spot that we're fishing right now. And what you're looking for is a lot of different things, but ultimately stuff that's gonna look like this right here. Now, if you zoom in on that, that's clearly a walleye right off the bottom. Scroll over here, here's clearly another walleye up off the bottom. Here's another one right here. Now, what do you notice about that side imaging shot? There's a couple different things you can notice. Number one, the fish aren't all like ding, 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 right next to each other. There's fish here, there's a fish here, there's a fish here. Another one coming down the graph right here. Thing number two, what are they relating to? It's always the other thing I ask myself. What are these fish relating to here? Seemingly nothing, right? They're just on a big sand flat. Now, this obviously on the screen right here, you can look and say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's probably 5 fish right there. That's a decent little concentration. I'm not as interested in like waypointing all these fish. I'm just gonna drop a waypoint on that rough area. Now, if you're gonna go fish for those fish, are you gonna jig vertical? Are you just gonna spot lock and just kind of fan cast around? That is one way you could do it. But when the fish are this scattered like this, there's just a fish here, a fish here, a fish way over there. Makes more sense to be in a moving situation and trying to sharpshoot fish, either with side imaging or with a forward facing or something like that. So a lot of times when we're looking at side imaging, we're not just like looking for fish, we're looking for what are those fish relating to? Is there an edge there that those fish are holding on? Or is it just a big expansive sand flat like this? The other thing when you're doing this, we're on a lake right now that has massive sand flats. You can go 4 miles that way and the depth will be the same and the bottom will look the same. You can go 3 miles that way, the depth's gonna be slightly different, the bottom's gonna look exactly the same. Now, since I've started talking, I haven't seen a single fish on here. So don't get caught in this spot where like you go up 50 yards and you're like, there's none here. When you are in an area that has defined edges, like a lot of times a big rock to sand transition, a big weed edge in 12 feet, those are the situations where you might go down after 50 yards and get to the end of it and say like, oh, there's no fish here. No point in looping back through that. If there's fish near that edge, they're gonna be sucked up to it a lot of times. So whenever I look at side imaging and fall, we spend a lot of our season in 12 feet of water to 5 feet of water in the fall. Whenever I'm running side imaging, I'm looking for fish. I'm looking for, are these roaming fish that are constantly moving around on a big sand flat like this, or are they relating to a specific edge? These are things to all note. And you can see as I've been driving around here now, I basically have seen nothing else. Here's one fish right here, right? But unless that fish is followed up with other fish in immediate, closeness to it, which it doesn't look like it is, there's no reason for me to stop and fish there because I'm gonna be fishing for one fish in a sea of sand flat here. So this is how I use side imaging. We kind of got lucky that right off the bat there was just immediate fish. Since then, I've probably gone, trolling motors on high, I've probably gone a couple 100 yards and haven't seen anything. Obviously, you're gonna see this all up and down a big flat like this. Pocket of fish, no fish, pocket of fish. And those fish that aren't relating to an edge are constantly moving. So don't get caught in the rut of this, like fishing that waypoint that you dropped. Because my guess is by now, by the time I turn around to go fish those fish are gonna be moving around. Use your side imaging not just to find fish, but also to catch fish. Huge tip when you're fishing shallow in the fall. Got him right there. That one's feeling all right. Man, we're looking at a lot of fish and only a few are biting, and I tried something very different there. It's a little bit more the fight we want.
Explain what you did different.
Instead of fishing a jig, jigging a plastic, caught a fish doing that, jigging a crawler, caught a fish doing that. And I was getting fish to come up and they just weren't like biting the bait above their head or kind of jigging it, the way you normally jig it. This one, I literally just let it sit on the bottom, watched the fish go into the bottom, and just literally sat there shaking it. The fish picked it up. That's something I've seen work on a few different lakes, but especially this lake. I don't know why it took me that long to try doing it. Should be one of the nicer fish here. Although when you're fishing in 9-10 feet of water, they can all pull pretty hard. That is one thing with jig fishing. You'll see the cadence can make all the difference in the world. Coming off of summertime, a lot of times we're so used to trying to jig a bubble fish's head. Look at these things go. Where's my net at? So used to jigging a bubble fish's head, but a lot of times in the fall, it seems like these fish like eating a bait that's just right on the bottom. And there's a nice walleye right there. Just a fatty. I'll give you guys a look at him here. That was like a light bulb moment. For the last hour, all I've been saying is like, something's off. We're not doing something right. Or should say the fish aren't doing something right, but a lot of times that means maybe our jig cadence just needed to change. And that one bit, that's the new Kalen's show jig for next year. Tungsten jig head. He was never gonna come off. Just a night crawler on there, shaking it right on the bottom. There we go. Even when you walleye fish every day, you get edumacated plenty of times by these fish. And when the bite's just crazy good and you're catching fish one after another, you don't really learn a whole lot. You generally learn a lot. When all of a sudden it's tough, you're seeing fish, not catching them, and all of a sudden, light bulb goes off.
Did you say edumacated?
Yeah. You've never been edumacated?
This is what we're doing.
How big was your graduating class in high school?
18 folks.
You were definitely edumacated then for about 18 years.
That's right.
Oh, there she goes. Back down. I love it. Even though it's early September now, we're starting to see water temps back to like 68 degrees. That's definitely got some fish starting to do a little bit more fall-y things. Some of those fish starting to pull out of some of the deep basins and get up on some of these shallow flats. A lot of times you'll start seeing a lot of bait. And the musky fishermen know this all too well, but you'll start seeing a lot of life back like super shallow, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 feet of water, whatever it is. And a lot of these lakes where a lot of that real shallow stuff might have been void of life for all year. And obviously the predators know where that life's going. So we're starting to see fish do fall things. And where we're fishing right now, I mean, this flat, you could literally come here from now until November and catch walleyes. All right, guys. Another tip, because I know we're going to get asked it 100 times in the comment section, because for some reason when you talk about jig fishing, everybody likes to talk about rods, and it does make a big difference. I am not one to sit up here and say I need a rod for every different thing. That's completely overkill, right? But there's certain actions you want for basically the two principled ways in which you do a lot of jig fishing. One way I do a lot of jig fishing, snappy, aggressive things. The other way I do a lot of jig fishing, light, floaty, non-aggressive things. And there's two different rods I like for those presentations. Now, my all-time favorite rod ever for jig fishing is a Elliott 7.3 medium light fast action rod. A little bit longer. I remember when all jig rods were like 6 feet long. This is obviously a longer rod. This is by far my favorite finesse jig rod ever made. Pair that with 10-pound braid. Some guys like mono or fluoro. I generally like braid the most. And then put your finesse jig on there. Generally, I'll fish a lot of live bait on here, or small plastic is what I like to fish on this rod, but most of the time live bait. Now, why do I like this rod? One reason in particular. It lets me, when a fish grabs this thing, I can load that tip up. It's got a nice spongy tip on there, and a lot of times you'll pick up, the bait will be on the bottom, you'll just kind of see that action in the rod tip right there. The other big reason is, if I want to chuck a small light jig in a fathead 90 feet, you can see how easy this is. And that thing easily just went 75, 80 feet without even trying. If you do try to whip a small, like minnow style bait on a light jig head with a stiff rod, you're gonna end up with one problem. It's gonna fly off the tip every single time. So this is the rod I do for a lot of my finesse stuff. Jig minnow, light plastic, things like that. Lets you load that tip, set into those fish, lets you cast a lot farther, detect bites a lot easier, all that good stuff. Phenomenal rod for fighting fish. Now, you don't have to go out and buy a $280 rod, but look for a rod that has these same attributes. A little bit longer, soft tip, good parabolic load, and very sensitive. And whether you're looking at Elliott or the 2B lineup or the series, they all have a 7.3 medium light like this, and I'll link them down below. Now, that's my finesse rod. Now, on the other end of the spectrum, snappy fishing. Now, when you're fishing snappy things, what is going to happen, this is a 3/8 ounce bait. I want to be imparting everything my rod does, I want the bait to do. So this is a 6.9 medium fast by Elliott. Now, if you take that lighter rod and do something that looks like this, you're gonna get a lot of tip load. And what's gonna happen is, as you're snapping that bait, the bait's not gonna be doing what you want it to do because the tip is absorbing too much of that snap, right? So whenever I'm fishing plastics, this is what I go to. It's a shorter rod. It's much faster, has a lot less tip play, a little bit stiffer, and that's what lets me impart all of the action when I fish one of these heavier or really lighter plastics on a rod like this. So this rod I always put braid on because it lets me have even more kind of whatever my rod tip's doing, that bait's doing. There's no stretch in the braid. I'll put 10-pound braid on both of these, tie in a longer fluorocarbon leader, and away you go. So if you're fall jig fishing, there's generally two rods I use. One's a softer live bait rod. One's a little bit shorter, a little bit more aggressive snap jigging plastic rod. And those two rods are gonna cover dang near everything you'd ever wanna do with a jig in your hand. Good cast. Got him. Fish on. Knew that one had to happen. There's two good ones way out there. Or two good marks. Not a real big fish here. First I thought it was just one mark, but it was two marks on the graph. Working it real slow on the bottom. Seems to be what they like. Some days you gotta work a little bit harder for them. Probably doesn't always come through in the video, whether fishing's like lights out or whether it's kind of picking off a biter here and there. It's a little bit more of the picking off a biter here and there, but we are certainly catching them on the jig. Working it right on the bottom now. And that's kind of what fall's all about. Beautiful keeper size walleye right there. He's about the cookie cutter, would you say, Mitcher? Yeah. 17 inches. Beautiful walleye. Let's let him go. Fall is in the air. Tomorrow, the high is 60 and the low is 39 degrees. And generally, when you start getting into fall, cold fronts don't matter. Cold front's not a thing to be scared of in the fall, but this week is going to be kind of the first set of days where it's like, ooh, time for some bibs. Time for that Sims puff jacket. Time to really start paying attention to those trail cams. Which I've been doing since July, because I'm just that dialed in the deer woods, Mitchell. Yeah. I got so many programs going on out there in the deer woods, y'all wouldn't even believe it.
Break us down a pattern quick.
And we got the iconic pattern, the feed to bed, or the bed to feed pattern. I think that's...
Do you like to use that on a full moon solar eclipse?
Oh, yeah.
Angle in the atmosphere?
Yeah, that's right. I don't want to give the viewers everything here at one go, but you know, it is a solid pattern that has proven to work for me.
Big bucks.
So, big bucks, dude. So many big bucks, 3 of them can fit in my chest freezer.